I want to speak about something that actually has been touched in the past. There's a saying, Ein beis hamedrash b'lo chidush. But when you're going to this medrash, you're going to learn, even if you learn something that you have learned yesterday, it's inevitable that you will find something new. So therefore, to revisit the inyanim that were discussed in the past is not a loss, because there's always something new, some new insight, and certainly there is a better understanding when it is repeated again and when one has a chance to reflect on it again. The point of the topic that was brought to my attention is very narrow. It's a very simple question of what we see lately, Baruch Hashem, that the Sforim on the tables are being taken care of. It was really painful to come into this medrash and see Sforim lying around, thrown around in all kinds of disarray. Besides the fact that when you need a sefer you can't find it, it's just the disrespect for the Sforim and disrespect for the place that is very, very disconcerting, very hurtful. And I want to talk about this, perhaps in a broader way. We also spoke one time, I remember, what is the concept from a Torah perspective of self-respect. I think there is actually the title on that talk is self-respect or self-value from a Torah perspective. There is no such thing as self-respect in a narrow sense. Self-respect in the sense that I'm respecting myself because of myself is a silly saying. What is the meaning of respect? The Gemara tells a story. And there was a great Amoira, Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, for those who are not familiar, we know that we have two Talmudim. We have two Torah Shebe'al Peh is recorded in two places. Talmud Bavli, which we normally learn, and there is Talmud Yerushalmi, the whole Talmud that was learned in Eretz Yisrael. Rabbi Yochanan was the author of Talmud Yerushalmi. So there's a saying brought down in the Gemara from Rabbi Yochanan that Rabbi Yochanan said, Mono mechabdusa, that my garments give me respect. As a matter of fact, Rabbi Yochanan used to say that when he had to go through a field of thorns, and the thorns, by the way, before we go on, to understand, in context, I mean, to buy a suit today is a triviality. It's available, readily available. It's just a question of a couple of $100. Sometimes it's more difficult, sometimes it's easier. But basically, it's readily available. It's not something that you have to go through great pains to obtain. But in those days, a garment was a property. So Rabbi Yechon used to say that when he used to pass through a thorns field, and the thorns would grab on the garments and possibly damage the garment, he would roll the garment up and rather have his feet be affected by the thorns than his garment. Which is really a phenomenal thing. And this was Rabbi Yochanan. He was not a showcase person. He was a deep person. And he said, because Mona Mechabdusa, because the garment is Mechabed the person, gives honor to the person. What is honor? What does it mean? We learned, actually, it's mentioned in today's parsha and mentioned last week. No, Nohar HaGodel is in today's parsha. It says, Nohar HaGodel Nahar Pros, the great river, the Euphrates. And everyone knows that the Euphrates is not such a great river, physically speaking. Why is it called Nohar HaGodel, the great river? So Rashi right away says, because Nahar Pros is mentioned together with Eretz Yisrael, and on account of that, because it's related to Eretz Yisrael, because that it represents Eretz Yisrael, that's why it's a great river. In other words, when we talk about honor in Torah, we're not talking about the individual. We're talking about what the individual represents, what he stands for. A Yid is obligated to maintain self-honor because a Yid is a member of the Jewish people, and the Jewish people are Hashem's representatives in the world. They are godly people. Everywhere a Yid goes, he is representing God in the world. This we know historically, that why are Jewish people so discriminated and so disliked? I don't want to use harsh words in the 9 days. Is because the Jewish people represent God. And this is repeatedly, clearly stated in the Torah and in Tanakh. And Rashi says that a person, one who stands up against the Jewish people, he is not standing up against the people. There is nothing in the nature of the Jewish people that is so abhorrent and so dislikable. On the contrary, they're a handsome and pleasant, good, kind people. They're smart, they're wise, they're good. Why are they so despised? It is because they stand for the presence of God in the world. And God is something that the world does not readily subscribe to, no matter what is being claimed. You know, we like God and so forth. It is not something that is readily acceptable in terms of the God the way the Jewish people represent it. Because the presence of God immediately disclaims any personal accomplishment, any personal greatness. Oh, everything is God. What about me? I want to have credit for what I accomplish. And the Jewish people, by their very presence, cancel that out. The Jewish people, by their very presence, cancel that out, and by their history, cancel that out. Because they were persecuted throughout the ages in the most severe possible manner, and they survived all their persecutors, all the powerful persecutors that claimed to own the world. the Jewish people survive them because they represent the godly presence in the world. And therefore, a Yid, wherever he may find himself, because of what he represents and what he stands for, he has to know that he either is Mekadesh Shem Shemayim, either he glorifies the name of heaven, or God forbid, he is Mechalel Shem Shemayim, he profanes the name of heaven. And for this reason, it is important that a Yid should represent himself to the world in a manner that the world recognizes that this is a respectable, representing a respectable entity. When the Bochrim started going out on Mivtzoyim, and they asked the Rebbe, how are we going to go to Mivtzoyim with representing 770 people are not going to want to talk to us? So the Rebbe said, just put on a tie and all doors will be open for you. Just put on a tie. Clearly, a tie to a 770 bocher means nothing. But nevertheless, because of what he stands for, what he represents, not himself, he has to put on a tie. In our personal lives, this is the periphery. In our personal lives, as we are progressing and reviewing our own progress and our own activities, our learning and our davening, and Hashem's help, our future, we always have to recognize that when we pursue success, a Yid wants to be successful, whether it be in learning, in davening, in doing mitzvahs, or even in business. He seeks success because of who he is, because of the fact that he is a Yid. We have to, first and foremost, recognize and value our neshomas, not the goof. The goof is but a vessel for the neshama to be in the world. But the neshama is a real thing. And the neshama is come to this world, as the Alter Rebbe explains, with a mission, and is given the measured time during which to accomplish this mission, recognizing that there is a holy mission for each individual. From my presence over here, therefore I value my time. It's not a question of valuing my time. It's a question of valuing the time of the Holy Neshama, valuing the time of a member of the Jewish people. This is the concept of self-respect from a Torah perspective. A person who sees himself as an individual, an isolated being in the big world, it's almost silly to say he respects himself. What does it mean he respects himself? In relative to what? But when he really contemplates of who he truly is, then the union of respect floats up clearly. And then the union of respect is an imperative, and it gives him special strength to carry through his mission, because he's constantly aware of the great mission and the great abilities and the koiches and the opportunity that he is being granted in order to accomplish this mission. No Yid is an isolated individual. Every Yid represents the entire Jewish people. How is respect represented? How do we translate respect in practical terms? The Rebbe explains that the previous Rebbe explains in the Maimer of Yud Shvat that there are treasures that a king holds in his treasure house, such treasures that no one has ever seen. They're kept behind bars, heavy doors with lock and key. No one has ever seen. On very rare occasions will the king bring him out, allow people to take a peek on these treasures. The Rebbe speaks in that Maimer regarding the fact that these most precious treasures the king will utilize when he needs to go and win a war. Yes, he explains a whole concept of nitzochen, of victory, and so forth. But I'm going to focus in on this principle itself. Here are treasures that are most beautiful and exquisite object in the world, that are unique. And how do we treat them? Instead of showing off with them, we hide them in a treasure house. In other words, recognizing the value of something and respecting its value. As a matter of fact, the Rebbe says in that same Maimer that these treasures are of such value that this is what actually establishes the kingdom. This is what makes the king a king, because he has these kind of treasures. And so I said, what do we do with these treasures? We don't flaunt them. We don't show them off. These treasures are kept hidden. Why? Because they are beyond, they're greater than being showing off. So we see that respect does not necessarily mean showing off, showing one's greatness. Respect means recognizing a value for what it is. If the value is such that is beyond the level of showing off, then it should be hidden. It's too precious to be shown off. Therefore, how do we understand the concept of precious and the concept of respect. Essentially, it is to recognize the true and intrinsic value in the object. Let me give you an example. We have a sefer, we have a book. The sefer is a chumash, a tilim, a tanya, a maimer, a gemara, whatever it is, a sefer. The value of this sefer to us, practically speaking, is that when I need to learn, I open up the Gemara and I learn. Now that I've learned it, I close the Gemara, and now the Gemara has no value to me. Because I've learned it already. I don't need to learn it now. Now, a different sefer has a value to me. My bed is a value to me. I have to go to sleep. And therefore, the Gemara is of no consequence to me at this point. Maybe tomorrow I'll learn a different Gemara. Who cares? Which means that we regard, from that perspective, we regard the value of an object only to the extent that I'm using it, of its use to me. I remember I was once in a conversation with a gentleman. He had admittedly some peculiar ideas, but he was a very smart man. And I asked him whether he has a personal private library, where he has books in his house. Books for him. He says, I don't see the point of having books. Any book I want, I go into the library and I get it. I don't see any point of having it. On the other hand, the Rebbe said a whole miftzah. You know what a miftzah is? Everybody knows what a miftzah is. That we should have sforim in the house. Own sforim. Buy the smallest sforim. That was the expression of this miftzah. What do we see this contrast? When I learn the Sefer, it's a recognition of a temporary value of the Sefer. At this moment when I need to learn, I need to reference this, it has a value because I need to reference. Which means the whole assessment of its value is for the moment that I need it. It's all based on my need of the Sefer. Once I have learned it, that moment is past and it has no value. Recognizing the true value of the Sefer means recognizes the value of the Sefer in a transcendent manner. In other words, a non-temporary sense. It is not just a source of information. It is a valuable treasure. A valuable treasure that is valuable all in and of itself. And to have it is valuable, even if you don't learn it. As we see from this king, that his whole kingdom is based on the fact that he has hidden treasures someplace deep down and under the ground. And that gives the value and the support and the basic strength of his kingdom. We all have our faculties. We have seichel, we have brain power, we have midas, we have emotions, we have hands, and we have feet, and we have mouth and eyes and ears, we have senses, we have abilities of doing things. We have all kinds of capabilities. We have all kinds of capabilities. All of these capabilities come into focus, come into value when they are to be used. When I need to go from place to place, I use my feet. When I'm sitting on one place, feet are useless. When I need to speak, I use my mouth. When I don't need to speak, I don't use my mouth. my ability to speak. Each one of these has a measured value. But we all readily understand that a person is not to be valued and evaluated on the basis of what he is able or unable to do. We know a human being in general, a Yid in particular, his value is transcendent, meaning it goes beyond space and time. It is not measured by what he is able to do. It's an intrinsic value. Even our capabilities, our senses. There's a halacha, for instance, you know, that a kohen who had to do the avodah in Beis Hamikdash, a kohen, a priest who had to do the avodah in Beis Hamikdash, he had to be physically perfect. A kohen who has any kind of a blemish, physical blemish, was not permitted to do the avodah in Beis Hamikdash. Even such blemishes that are not interfering with his avodah at all. He can move around freely, he can act with his hands freely. Some kind of a blemish, any place, it makes him invalid, inappropriate for avodah. Because the Torah ascribes a value to a person in an intrinsic and in a basic manner. And that is because every person, every Yid, as we said before, he has a holy neshama, and he is a godly representative in the world. He is God's representative in the world. And therefore, by virtue of what he represents, he has an intrinsic value. We know from the Baal Shem Tov, I'm sure you all heard about the unique way that the Baal Shem Tov respected, literally, the simple Yid. Even his greatest Talmidim, his greatest disciples, who learned his Torah, who were his followers, who disseminated his teaching. Such men like the Maggid of Mizrich were envious of the way the Baal Shem Tov treated the simple Yid. Because the Baal Shem Tov treated the simple Yid because Baal Shem Tov said that this simple Yid, his neshama is so revealed, is so open, that he goes straight through to this principle that he is a godly representative. A great scholar has seichel, so his godliness is kind of processed through his seichel, whereas this simple Yid, his godliness comes right through. And Baal Shem Tov valued and loved these people enormously. I'm sure you know the stories of Soti, there's so many stories about it. If you want, at the end of the Tilim, there's a whole long story also printed regarding this principle.
I didn't understand how the fact that the Kohen is not physically blemished expresses the value that Torah puts on the essence of an individual, because intrinsic value, because we're talking about the external value of the Kohen here. Not
right. if the external value were valued on the basis of external value only, then the requirement would be that he has all faculties necessary to do the avodah. But faculties that are not interfering with his avodah would be insignificant, would not be taken into account. Here we see that everything is taken into account. Because, yes, he has to do physical avodah, and therefore he has to represent, in his physical standing, he has to represent the godly perfection, and therefore he has to be perfect. It is true that this is exclusively in the Beis Hamikdash, because in Beis Hamikdash, this was the one place where the physical and the spiritual came together completely. Where they did physical avodah, completely physical avodah, and that was a godly avodah. So coming back to us, we have to get to recognize this is an avodah in itself. We have to get to recognize that when we use a sefer, we are using a holy sefer, not just a source of information. When we learn a Maimer, I always explain that when we learn a Maimer Chassidus, the Maimer Chassidus was written by the Rebbe. Our Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, before the Rebbe, makes no difference. It was written by a holy man. And he wrote it in this book, and now we're reading it off the book. We're not reading it off the book. We are learning it from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe is teaching it out to us through the book. It's not dissociated from the author. We always have to know that we are learning it from the Rebbe. When we're learning the Torah, we have the Torah, we have to read the Holy Torah, the holiest thing that we have. And we all know how precious and what are the laws associated with how we have to regard and respect the Torah. We're not allowed to turn our backs to the Torah. We're not allowed all kinds of different things. Chas v'sholom, the Torah is disrespected. There's a whole consequences. Sometimes the whole congregation has to fast, chas v'sholom, if something happens with the Torah. Why? What's in the Torah? Is it the parchment? Is it the writing? The Torah is Hashem's Torah. This is this is Hashem's word, and Hashem speaks to us through the Torah. Every sefer that we learn has an intrinsic kedusha, intrinsic holiness. This is why you know that we have rules. For instance, we don't put a tilim on top of a chumash. We don't put a Gemara on top of a tilim or on a siddur. Everything has rules, because everything has an intrinsic kedusha, and it has to be respected in its proper level. We ourselves, we have to also recognize who we are. By recognizing who we are and what we represent and what are the koiches that we are utilizing in making our progress, we will then have the ability to utilize these koiches, and we'll have tremendous, enormously greater opening of our senses, opening of our minds and our hearts. When we approach learning and we think that the only way that what actually is taking place here is that I'm using the power of logic to understand the piece of Gemara, then we have a very limited chance of success, of actually getting into the Gemara. But when we understand that the seichel, the very concept that the Gemara is talking about, is the seichel that is inherent in our neshamas. This is the godly intelligence that Hashem has brought down to the world, and that our neshamas are capable to understand. With this recognition, with this approach, our minds and hearts open up to the topic that we're learning. There's a saying from Friedrich Rebbe, and the Rebbe talks about this, that when an army steps out, first goes out to the front, goes out to fight, they walk out singing a march of victory. It's called March Nitzochen. They go out, they sing the March of Nitzochen, March of Victory, even though they hadn't even yet met the enemy. And they have to still go through a big fight in order to be victorious. They're going to face a ferocious and a very powerful enemy. Why are they singing the March of Nitzochen? How are they victorious? Are they fooling themselves? The answer is no, they're not fooling themselves. The only way to go out to war is to know that you have already defeated the enemy. Practically speaking, in fact, you still have to prove it to the enemy that you have defeated him. And that's why you're going to war. But in essence, you have already defeated the enemy. That's the only way to go to war. If you are not sure whether you're going to be defeating or defeated, you'll have no business going to war. You're never going to make it. This is what the Torah says. That before Eden went out to war, the shoiter, the officer, the minister, whatever, the general would come up, and it says, anyone who is fearful, go home. Ish hayorev ha'ach ha'levav. It's in the Torah. Ish hayorev ha'ach ha'levav yelech v'yoshev l'beisei. Go back home. Because you don't understand what this is about. You think that to win a war is to shoot a rifle? To win a war is a mindset. A mindset of victory, mindset of yes, I'm doing the right thing and that's the wrong thing and I have to defeat the wrong. That's going to war, correct? There's no other way. The power with which we sit down to learn, especially all of us here who came to learn at relatively an advanced age, so to speak, did not have it from the cradle, and have to start from the beginning, from Aleph days and then further. It's a tremendous challenge. By on what basis am I undertaking this? I'm undertaking it on the basis that, in effect, I already know it all. Because the neshama knows it all. I already understand this is all the seichel of the godly seichel that my neshama already has. I just have to now reveal it and practically recognize it. But in effect, I'm not learning anything new. So, this individual person who has this koyach hanefesh, this koyach has this nishon, this person who has this mission, who is a member of this holy people. All of these things we have to recognize. If we deal with this person, we deal with ourselves, not with anybody, with ourselves, in a manner that speaks only that what is valuable about me, that which I can practically do. Beyond that, it's not valuable. We are in fact profaning that holiness. The Gemara says, this is in Halacha, that a Talmid Chacham, the one who learns Torah, Shenimtza Revav al Bigdoi, that a stain was found on his garment, Chayav Misa. Did you ever hear that? That's what it says. Talmid Chacham, Shenimtza Revav al Bigdoi, Chayav Misa. Look in the Shulchan Aruch that gives us guidance in every aspect of our lives, says that a Yid has special garments, special way that he dresses. A Yid has to dress respectfully and not gaudily, not to show, not to call attention to himself, but he has to dress clean, neat and respectful. A garment that is not respectful of the person, a Yid, especially a Talmid Chacham who learns Torah, is not allowed to wear. Because what's a garment? Who cares what's in the garment? Because by this, just by this dress, he is showing, he's making the statement that to him, what he represents is just the practical use of himself. And the garment has no practical use. It makes no difference what I wear. But that's not what a Yid stands for. A Yid has an intrinsic value, an intrinsic representation. Wherever he is, or whatever he does, even when he sleeps, he is also a godly neshama. So coming back to the initial topic that I said that I wanted to focus in on, you have to understand that if Sforim are thrown around, lying around, in this array, in a manner that is disorderly and without any, now it's showing that the Sforim right now have no use. I have no use for them. I'm busy doing something else. And who cares what happens to them? This is a complete misunderstanding what the Sforim are. Is disrespectful to the Sforim, disrespectful to the authors of the Sforim, disrespectful what the authors stood for, and disrespectful for us ourselves. Because we are saying that, when I'm learning the Sefer, then I'm something. When I'm not learning it, then it's nothing. We spoke early on, it's on the archives, in the early times that we had a chance to speak about these things here. Every aspect of intellectual recognition. We explained that there is Seichel Bahami, there is a seichel that even a behemoth is able to understand. We spoke about it at length, that the behemoths also have, animals also have seichel. And there is seichel anushi, what's called human seichel, human intelligence. And then there is seichel eliki, godly intelligence. In order to get to understand godly intelligence, which is the Torah that we learn, we have to understand every step before it. Between the animal seichel, the seichel that the animal understands, and we can also understand on the same level as the animal, and the godly intelligence, there is a vast gap. And the path to it, to understand godly concepts, it is to be able to understand concepts on a lower level, on the human level. Every aspect of understanding, like we're talking about simple things of putting the Sforim away in their proper place, keeping oneself neat, keeping one's possessions orderly and neat and clean. These are simple human things. These are the means, these are the stepping stones, the steps that allow oneself, a person, to get to understand the higher things, the real profound godly concepts. Without that, one may argue, but no, I understand what it says in the Maimer Chassidus, which is the most profound of godly concepts. And I'm not necessarily neat, and I'm not necessarily taking care of my possessions. I'm not necessarily careful about the Sforim. And I understand it. So to this, we have to very clearly understand that there are two distinct levels of understanding. Very distinct, far apart, and the significance between their distances and between their difference is very, very significant. There is a difference between I understand what you are saying, but you are the one who is saying it and I understand what you are saying, or I personally understand this Indian. To understand what it says in the Maimer is one thing. It says in the Maimer, I understand what the Maimer is saying. I can repeat it. But that it gives me understanding, and I can relate to that understanding, and it helps me to see myself and to see my world, that's a different understanding, different level completely. There is a little episode from Rebbe Maharash. Rebbe Maharash, this was the previous Rebbe's grandfather, Rebbe Maharash. So he was um, he was in Leningrad and in Petersburg in those days. Lubavitch, was not far from that city. This was the big capital city, the Tsarist capital. And in those days too, there were Yidden who lived in these big cities. Bichlal, under the Tsar, there was what's known the Pale of Settlement, which means that there were rules that Jews, Bichlal, Yidden, were not allowed to live in the big cities. Ask me why. I don't know. Yidden were not allowed to live in big cities. They were a species that were not welcome, except for Yidden who had special use, special service. And they were big business people, or they were professionals, doctors and such. They were permitted to live in big cities. So there were Yidden living in big cities with special permits. And the Rebbe Maharash was in the city, and this Yid, a Chosid, went into the Rebbe Maharash, and he brought his son with him. This son grew up in St. Petersburg, in a big city, and he didn't grow up in Lubavitch. That was a big contrast. In other words, he was exposed to the big city activities. He was involved in secular education, all kinds of different things. But nevertheless, he was a frumer bacher. He was a religious boy. So he came into the Rebbe Maharash, and his father introduced him to Rebbe, and he said, "My son, the student," in other words, he was like a student in the university. My son, the student, had already learned out the whole Tanya. The expression in Yiddish, he learned the whole Tanya. So the Rebbe, in Yiddish, the words, the play on words is very clear. So the Rebbe asked him, "Nu, and what did the Tanya teach him?" He already learned the whole Tanya. He taught the Tanya, but what did the Tanya teach him? There's a very big difference between learning out the Tanya and learning the Tanya and teaching the Tanya. In order to be able to understand what the Torah is teaching us, we have to have an open mind to it. That learning, those concepts have to be real to us. Not, I know what it says. That's not learning Torah. That's good enough for chemistry, but it's not good enough for Torah. Torah has to be a personal knowledge, personal understanding. And in order to have a personal understanding of Torah, you have to have a personal understanding of what Torah stands for and who you are. And you have to go through all these the little steps that lead up to a refined mind, a spiritually sensitive mind, and a refined heart. So that these inyanim that you learn really make sense. You don't take a Torah concept in a physical form. This is what's known to be to put gross, coarse garments on the finest spirit. This is why it is imperative that we use every aspect that we understand, every aspect of respect for the truth, for respect for the holiness. We must apply it to our daily lives, to ourselves and our sforim and our besmedrash and our colleagues, everything. All this is definitely instrumental and opens up our minds so that when we learn Torah, it makes sense. It makes sense to us. It becomes a real thing. There is a Gemara that says that when a Yid does a favor to another Yid, especially a Ruchnisik favor, he teaches another Yid, and he goes out of his way to teach another Yid Torah, then Nasim Moichoi Veliboy Zakim, his mind and heart become purified. Elef Pa'omim Koch, 1,000-fold, 1,000 times of that measure than if he had used this time to teach himself. Even though he is learning nothing new, to himself this is nothing. But the refinement that he experiences refines his mind, and as a result of that, the Rebbe said that it means literally. The Rebbe said it means very simply that thereafter, anything that would have taken him personally to learn 1,000 hours will now take him 1 hour. Because he absorbs what he learns. And the 1,000 hours is not a figurative form, it's a literal form, which means that he'll never get to it, because who is going to spend 1,000 hours to learn the same an Indian? Which means that the refinement, the profound insight and understanding that he gets from learning this 1 hour, he will never get. Because it will take him 1,000 hours to get there. We must not neglect any small step, because these are the aspects that are instrumental in refining us so that we can understand a godly thought. As simple as it may seem, but it doesn't at all mean that it has penetrated and permeated our minds. Yes, sir.
How does one develop this 1,000-time-fold exponential study? I didn't hear what you said.
If one does a favor to another Yid, or one teaches someone else and dedicates with dedication.
So through like kind of like through Avas Israel.
Mm-hmm. I'm bringing this to illustrate to you what it means to learn, to understand Torah. We can understand Torah, we have good brains, we can understand Torah very quickly, understand everything, I know everything that it says. That's not the objective. What did the Torah teach you? Did the Torah find place in your mind? Did the Torah find place in your heart? That's what we're looking for. Are you living with it? In order that the Torah should seep in, the Torah should make sense to you the same way as a piece of mathematics. That's already something else. And deeper than mathematics. Because mathematics, after all, is just a clear view, but this is something which is truth itself. So that you can relate to it truly, that's something else again. For that you need a refined mind.
Would you say that you said that the simple things it will cause to reach the higher level of understanding? So my question is like this: would you say that it's a matter of cause and effect, meaning and if that's the answer, is the simple thing causes the higher level of understanding, or the higher level of understanding causes the simple things to occur? That's one. Or it's like a circle of effects that each one vitalizes each other every time, meaning the simple things causes the higher level, and the higher level causes immediately to the simple things, and it goes like a circle.
Well, it's not a cause and effect type of thing. I don't know exactly, what makes you think of this. It's like this. If you need to see behind this wall, the higher you step, the further you can see. The higher you step up, even in straight view, the higher you step up, the further you can see. When you were standing on the lower step, your view, the eyesight, so to speak, the line of vision is limited, and you think this is the end of the world. That's all there is. And you step up one little step, all of a sudden, oh, it's much bigger than I thought. Step another step, oh, it's vastly bigger. Okay. Refinement of the mind means more of the sense of neshama and less of the sense of the guf. Neshama and guf is a very broad topic all in itself. But let me use these couple of minutes we have just to give you, an introduction. The difference between neshama and guf is the guf is intrinsically imperfect in itself, which means that the guf is in constant need of support. You have to feed it, you have to rest it, you have to exercise it, you have to train it. It's not a perfect entity in itself. Anytime. Even a well-groomed body needs constant maintenance. The neshama is just the opposite. It's perfect in itself. Doesn't need any sustenance. Doesn't need any sustenance, any support. And therefore, when the guf learns something, because the guf is imperfect naturally, therefore, when we view things from a guf perspective, we can only see it from the limited perspective of what use that has in terms of giving service to the guf, giving me service. When you learn things from a neshama perspective, you can look at things entirely independent of anything, perfectly objectively, because the neshama is not in need of anything. Therefore, you could see and understand the truth of the inyan, not what use I have out of it and how it services me, but how the inyan is true in itself. Now we have a guf and a neshama together. Everything we do is guf and neshama together. Guf and neshama together means that the only way that we can understand even neshama inyanim, even spiritual inyanim, is through the guf, through the brain, which is part of the guf. And this is where the concept of refining one's brain comes in. So that the guf will now become refined and allow a trickle, an aspect of the neshama. Now, it's to understand the inyan somewhat like the neshama understands it, somewhat in an objective way, meaning not in a way that it is something that is useful to me, but something that is true in itself. This is the pshat refinement of the goof, refinement of the neshama, refinement of the goof, of the brain and the heart. And the more one recognizes, what we're talking about is the more one recognizes and relates himself to the greater truth that he represents, rather than himself in his limited capacity. Ayid represents Yiddishkeit, represents the Meibesh, and he dedicates himself to it. And he treats himself and treats his objects in that manner that helps him to step up to that point that he doesn't look at things only from his own perspective, he looks at things from a perspective of truth. And therefore he is able to really understand the way they are. So this is, in effect, if you ask, if you want to graphically describe it, it is like stepping up a little higher, so that your vision is not blocked by the physical limit. Seeing into space further out. Normally our vision is blocked usually to the extent of what is currently useful. That which like how when you drive a car. What is the distance that you have to see? The distance that you must see is far enough that if there's an object over there, you'll have room to stop or to avoid the object. That's the extent that you have to see. I say that's the level. But real sight means seeing seeing abundantly, independent of what your use is, and that is also the oneness.
Can you explain the method, or not the method? Why? And I've read this in several places, but I want to know in your words why love of a fellow Jew, not only opens your mind to Torah, but is truly the key to everything. Can you explain? Because I know the concept is true, but I can't put it in intellectual terms.
Okay, I'll tell you what. I will mitzvah Shem, but now I think my time is up here. So mitzvah Shem another time. Okay?